Rain is no longer falling across the East Coast, but the floodwaters are only beginning to recede. The chaos it leaves behind is a silent but strategic reminder of the fragility of infrastructure, the volatility of climate systems, and the limits of government response. In the aftermath of the severe storms that hammered the region from Virginia to Connecticut, the images are all too familiar. Water-soaked roadways, submerged vehicles, power grids fractured under pressure, and communities waking up to the quiet violence of nature's retreat. It is not just a meteorological event. It is a logistical test, a systems failure, and a public trust challenge. At least 15,000 residents across the tri-state corridor remain without electricity. But the disruption goes far beyond outages. In New York City, the storm arrived at the most vulnerable moment, the afternoon rush. Subway tunnels became canals. Water burst from the walls with unrestrained force, collapsing public transportation into paralysis. Commuters clung to stair railings, not as a symbolic gesture of urban resilience, but as a basic survival response. In Queens, entire lanes of traffic froze. Cars and a semi-trailer were stranded on the Clearview Expressway until rescuers arrived to evacuate the drivers. To the south, in Maryland, the storm took a more permanent toll. A 13-year-old boy playing outside was swept into a drainage pipe by a flash flood. No time to react. No opportunity to respond. Just gone. This is not merely a weather event. It is the materialization of climate volatility, intersecting with decades of infrastructural neglect. The question is not whether storms will come. The question is whether America is built to withstand them. Emergency crews worked through the night across Queens to restore subway operations after 3 to 4 inches of rain fell in a single hour, an intensity well beyond traditional engineering tolerances. Elsewhere in the borough, drivers were seen sitting atop the roofs of their vehicles, marooned by systems that failed beneath them. In Maryland, emergency responders waded through knee-high waters, carrying children out of harm's way. Further west near Baltimore, floodwaters proved fatal. A child swept into a storm drain, a consequence of rapid onset flooding and insufficient warning protocols. The airline industry, too, absorbed the impact. Ground stops, flight delays, and cascading cancellations swept across airports from Boston to Washington. In Florida, the ripple effect reached space operations. NASA and SpaceX were forced to abort the Crew 11 launch to the International Space Station mere seconds before liftoff. And as the weather front moved southward, the climate threat did not vanish. It simply relocated. Meteorologists are now tracking the storm system as it stalls across the southeastern United States. From Atlanta to Jacksonville, from Charleston to Dallas, the probability of flash flooding remains elevated. Atmospheric moisture levels are dangerously high, creating potential rainfall rates exceeding 2 inches per hour. Cities such as Asheville, Charlotte, Wilmington, Columbia, and Raleigh remain at elevated risk. The same applies to Montgomery and parts of Atlanta. The storm is not over. It has only changed its coordinates. Meanwhile, a cold front moving across the Midwest and Northeast is offering temporary relief. For cities like Omaha, Minneapolis, Chicago, Cleveland, Philadelphia, and Boston, temperatures in the 70s have returned. But this relief is meteorological, not political, and certainly not structural. The Southeast, by contrast, remains under intense heat advisories. 28 million Americans are included in active alerts as the heat index surges alongside the water table. The fragility of infrastructure under compound conditions, heat and flooding, is no longer a hypothetical scenario. It is unfolding in real time. And yet, this environmental volatility is only one dimension of the nation's evolving crisis map. In Texas, grief has turned into political inquiry. 1 month after catastrophic floods killed over 130 people in the state's hill country, families gathered in Kerrville for an emotional hearing. The meeting, originally designed as an administrative review, quickly transformed into something more volatile, a tribunal of accountability. Anger boiled over. Not at the rain, not even at the river, but at the lack of timely warning, the absence of leadership, the failure of emergency coordination. A mother recounted helping her 66-year-old mother climb into cedar trees, trying to escape rising waters. Residents demanded answers. Why were key county officials unreachable during the emergency? Why was the emergency management coordinator asleep during the most critical hours? The answers were procedural, but the losses were irreversible. 27. That is the number of friends lost by one local man, Bud Bolton, who testified with quiet rage. He recalled stories of people unable to find their daughters, their sons-in-law, their neighbors. And as his son recounted finding a young girl's body with a kayak, it became clear. This is not just a story of weather. It is a story of administrative collapse. Lawmakers are now racing against a short legislative window, less than 3 weeks to consider proposals for reform. But history is not kind to post-disaster policymaking. Inertia, not urgency, has been the pattern. And while one part of the government faces backlash for inaction, another is advancing its agenda with startling speed. President Donald Trump, now well into his second term, has unveiled sweeping new tariffs across the global trade map. Yesterday marked his self-imposed deadline for international trade agreements. For nations that failed to secure deals, the consequence was clear. Tariffs between 10 and 50% will go into effect on August 7th. An executive order signed late last night formalized existing trade arrangements with partners such as Japan, the United Kingdom, and the European Union. But for other nations, the message was unmistakable. Negotiate or absorb the cost. The move marks the highest U.S. tariff levels since the 1930s, a period whose economic scars are well documented. Protectionism is no longer theoretical. It is federal policy. Canada now faces a 35% tariff. Switzerland, 39%. Mexico's 20% tariff will remain unchanged for now. China's penalties have been delayed until August 12th. But the White House has made it clear, this is not a retreat. It is a recalibration. Meanwhile, agreements with South Korea and the Philippines are in place, though final details are pending. This is a coercive diplomatic strategy executed through commercial means, and its global implications are immense. Within the domestic economy, the slow-motion effects of tariffs are beginning to surface. Importers who ship goods before August 7th can defer payment until October. But this temporary cushion does not offset the long-term trajectory. U.S. consumers will face price increases, not as a possibility, but as an inevitability. From iPhones to textiles, from coffee to clothing, from agricultural imports to consumer electronics, nearly every imported item will bear a minimum 10% surcharge. For countries facing elevated tariffs, the rates can exceed 40%. These are not selective measures. They are comprehensive economic shifts. The implications for the labor market are equally sobering. If companies absorb higher import costs, the margin for labor expenses narrows. And when costs must be cut, the most immediate and scalable target is employment. Fewer hours, fewer jobs, and fewer new hires. This is the inflationary squeeze, redirected into workforce contraction. The Federal Reserve has already warned that tariffs may serve as an inflation accelerant while also weakening employment indicators. The dual threat of price increases and job losses creates a volatile matrix for policymakers and a precarious outlook for workers. Meanwhile, at the symbolic core of American power, a different kind of construction is underway. The White House is preparing to undergo its largest structural transformation since the Truman administration. Next month, a new 90,000 square foot ballroom will break ground. The project carries a $200 million price tag, and the president insists it will be financed by private donors and his own contributions. The new space will replace existing East Wing offices, including those traditionally used by the First Lady. Critics argue the project is excessive. Supporters call it legacy infrastructure. But either way, the transformation is no longer conceptual. It is literal. President Trump has already reshaped the Oval Office, paved over parts of the Rose Garden, and installed new flagpoles across the grounds. These are not simply aesthetic changes. They are architectural expressions of political permanence. Whether symbolic or strategic, the message is the same. This administration intends to leave a mark not just on policy, but on the physical seat of power itself. Financially, the numbers support the ambition. Trump's affiliated super PAC has raised over $177 million in the first half of the year. Only $4 million has been spent. The rest sits idle, poised for influence. And while questions remain about donor motivations, including links to pardoned individuals and foreign-owned firms, the legal framework remains intact. No regulations breached, only perceptions recalibrated. This is not just a post-presidency fund. It is an operational war chest, designed not for retirement, but for continued relevance. Even as new storms form on the horizon, the administration's position is clear. Control the trade routes, control the messaging, control the architecture, control the narrative. Elsewhere, questions of justice continue to surface in the aftermath of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most vocal accusers, died by suicide earlier this year. President Trump recently stated that Epstein had stolen her from his Mar-a-Lago club decades ago. The phrasing sparked backlash from her family, who demand the release of sealed case files and a public rejection of any potential pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell Epstein's convicted accomplice. Trump has neither confirmed nor denied whether clemency is under consideration. But the political signal is unmistakable. This is a presidency willing to wade into even the most radioactive controversies with calculated precision. And as Washington processes political fallout, another tragedy unfolds this time in Arkansas. A 28-year-old elementary school teacher has confessed to the double murder of a couple hiking with their daughters in Devil's Den State Park. The motive remains unclear, but the implications are profound. The suspect had moved across 4 schools in 4 years. Some parents reported concerns as early as his first teaching job, including incidents where he allegedly kept female students behind during recess. Districts claim no red flags emerged in background checks. But the pattern is clear. This is not just a criminal case. It is a systemic failure of oversight, hiring, and interstate communication. The victims, Clinton and Kristen Brink, died while trying to protect their daughters. The girls survived, reaching a ranger station to alert authorities. The suspect was arrested 5 days later, while receiving a haircut less than 30 miles away. America's fault lines are not just along rivers, or in classrooms, or between nations. They are embedded in the decision-making systems, in the blind spots of bureaucracy, in the distance between warnings and responses. From flash floods to trade wars, from White House construction to courtroom silence. This is not a nation at rest. It is a nation in transition, politically, environmentally, and structurally. The question is not whether these stories are connected. The question is whether we are willing to see the patterns and act before the next storm, political or otherwise, arrives.